every time you turn around and you think the wrestling industry can't get any crazier, then it just surprises the hell out of you. Welcome, guys, to the Rantin Review. We are talking today about this entire mess that has been going on all day today on Friday. Started this morning, it's going on into the evening as Dynamite has been on tonight, and that is the news that WWE and New Japan Pro Wrestling were in talks. Just the two biggest wrestling companies in the world, arguably, were in talks about a partnership, an exclusive partnership for New Japan to only partner with WWE in the United States. Hopefully you guys are doing well today, even with all the craziness that's gone on and God knows how bad Twitter's gotten, because I had to get off of it earlier today. But before we get into all that, of course, you guys know these are my videos, and I always got some free stuff for you guys down in the description box below. Amazon Prime sign-ups, 30-day free trial. You get free Audible if you want to check out some podcasts or some ebooks, Chris Charlton's ebook, the Young Bucks ebook, any number of ebooks from wrestlers. And of course, we have free BlockFi cryptocurrency available on BlockFi. They may even give you $100 million worth of Bitcoin, considering what's going on with them these days, by accident. And of course, we've got 2 free stocks available for Webull. Each of those could be worth up to $1,850, so definitely check out all those goodies down in the description box below. So here's pretty much a synopsis of what is going on today. Jesus Christ. I'm going to record, this is the 3rd time I've recorded this video today, by the way. So late last night, early today, Dave Meltzer put out his Wrestling Observer newsletter. Of course, Dave is synonymous with New Japan Pro Wrestling. A lot of people attribute to him as being part of the rise of New Japan and AEW. A lot of WWE sweaties cannot stand him because, you know, he talks about New Japan and as being better than the WWE, and then, you know, all the, well, if it happened in the Tokyo Dome, you would have given it 50 stars, kind of, all of that nonsense, right? So that's Meltzer. So he already has a bit of a lot of fans have an issue with him. And not just WWE sweaties. So he put out in the Observer newsletter that WWE and New Japan Pro Wrestling apparently sometime in late March, early April were in talks, mind you, not an agreement, about WWE being the exclusive partner of New Japan Pro Wrestling in the United States, which would thus freeze out All Elite Wrestling and Impact Wrestling, and there are many obvious reasons for that. Now, one of the big reasons, obviously, is that as many of us fans who have been following New Japan and following All Elite Wrestling know, those are two pretty powerful companies. You know, AEW just got a bunch of new TV time, a new TV deal, new money, new shows, and everything else. New Japan Pro Wrestling, who was very strong and was for a very long time, most of the last decade, considered the 2nd biggest wrestling company in the world behind WWE. They've fallen on a bit of hard times because of the pandemic and the situation over there in Japan. They've been trying to get through some creative issues they've been having over the last year. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, and they seemed a little bit vulnerable. So the presumption is now you got the 2 biggest American companies trying to bid for New Japan, which for New Japan is a great thing, because now they can kind of play both companies off of each other. Well, AEW's giving us this, what do you got, WWE? Well, WWE's giving us this, what do you have, AEW? So from that aspect, it's a good thing for New Japan, who probably is going to need an infusion of cash, given them having to run off a limited capacity for the last year. New Japan is not like it is in the States here, where most of the, you know, WWE and Impact and AEW get a lot of their money from TV deals. New Japan does have TV deals, but they are still heavily reliant upon people buying tickets and going to the shows. And again, because of the pandemic, they haven't been able to do that at capacity for over a year now. The big thought amongst many fans was that the Forbidden Door was open earlier this year when KENTA showed up on AEW Dynamite, which shot the crap out of everybody, including myself. And because we never thought it would happen, because there's all this bad blood between Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks and Cody and Hangman over what happened and how they left New Japan a couple years ago. And New Japan had some bad blood against them for some other stuff, and that whole story still has not been fully told. And it may be years before we actually hear the entire story about what happened with that. But it seems like over the past year or so that those tensions have calmed down. And we even had Rocky Romero and Ren Narita on AEW Evolution, or whatever it's called, Elevation, I think that's what it's called, their Monday YouTube show. So there's a lot going on there, and a lot of people have considered, anybody who is of objective mind, I say that again, objective mind, about the wrestling industry will look at this and go, well, you know, AEW, very solidly now #2 in the United States. Now they're kind of a distant #2. There's like WWE, and then there's AEW here, and then there's kind of like all the other promotions that are kind of, you know, at that level. So AEW's really firmly established itself as a solid #2 and in the country, and them as #2, New Japan being the #1 wrestling company in the East, AEW being #2 in the West, both of them having, you know, a significant amount of money, not as much as Vince, but they have enough fans, enough cachet, I should say, enough influence that could be a force not to beat WWE, but to keep WWE from being the global monopoly, or the New Japan show, they had to call it the Global World Wrestling Monopoly Syndicate, or the Global Wrestling Monopoly, or whatever they used to call that thing on their cartoon show, from literally becoming that. And WWE was well on its way to doing that up until the mid-2010s. So, if you're WWE and you want to be the monopoly, you want to break up any possibility of AEW and New Japan Pro Wrestling merging together, East and West, having this big international wrestling coalition that is still continuing to grow to this day. So we've got this guy, Nick Khan, who is the new president over in World Wrestling Entertainment. He's not from the wrestling world, he's from outside the wrestling world. It's amazing that that's happening, given the fact that if you go back and look at the history of WCW, and one of the things that a lot of people said was the downfall of WCW was putting people in the corporate positions who were not wrestling people and didn't know anything about wrestling. Well, they put this Nick Khan, ironically enough, his last name is Khan, to kind of counteract Tony Khan, who owns, or is part owner of AEW and running the show and booking the show. And these two Khans, are trying to go after the king, ironically enough, the promotion that's called the King of Sports, New Japan Pro Wrestling. I kid you not, sometimes the best stuff in wrestling is stuff that's not scripted. It's stuff that just ironically happens like that. So Nick Khan, and a lot of people suspect, has put out this word, and Meltzer picked up on it, that WWE was in talks with New Japan. Now, again, this was back late March and early April. So that was also the same time KENTA showed up on AEW Dynamite. So there's something a little bit off with the timing here. And if WWE was anywhere close to having a deal with AEW, with New Japan, I don't think we'd be seeing Rocky Romero and Ren Narita at Elevation this week. Now, initially, much like the Ospreay rumor from earlier in the week, I also thought this one was kind of like, I don't know about all that, because think about it this way. New Japan has had 2 opportunities now to take the United States Championship off of Jon Moxley, who is a contracted AEW wrestler. They did not. KENTA did not beat him, Yuji Nagata did not beat him, and they have not set up anybody else to beat him. So you would think if they are making plans to have that move, that the belt will come off of Moxley. And that would be something to keep an eye on, because if it does look like they all of a sudden just shuffle the belt off of Jon Moxley, then that partnership might not be as solid as we think. Plus, Ren Narita, like I said, and Rocky Romero were just on AEW. We had the reunion of Roppongi 3K, which I'm happy about because I love the Roppongi 3K, especially the theme song. Beretta and Rocky Romero. Obviously, KENTA's been on the show. Yuji Nagata's been on the show, and there are more to come, and there's a lot of stuff going on with AEW and New Japan that's in the works. Now, this is not to say plans can't change. Plans change all the time. In wrestling, you never say never. There was a time when Hulk Hogan joined WCW. I had been a wrestling fan for about 10 years at that point, and for the 10 years prior to that, I never thought that Hulk Hogan would be in WCW. I never thought that you would see WCW bought by WWE. I never thought WCW would be a bigger company than WWE. I never thought you could have a wrestler who wasn't in the WWE during the 2000s and the 2010s be able to become a big international superstar without being there, but we had Kenny Omega. So there's a lot of things that you never thought would happen that actually wound up happening in wrestling. So I'm not going to say there's never going to be another partnership, because they've had some before in the past between New Japan Pro Wrestling and WWE. Jushin Thunder Liger, about 6 or 7 years ago, was on an NXT takeover against Tyler Breeze. So there you go. They've put Inoki and Liger and other New Japan stars in the WWE Hall of Fame. There's not a contentious relationship between New Japan and WWE. It's just that WWE has never really, in probably 2 decades now, really committed any of their top stars to going over and wrestling in New Japan Pro Wrestling, which has happened in the past. So they were trying to rekindle that relationship, but I think anybody with any 2 brain cells can figure out the reason for this is not that WWE really wants to work with New Japan, is that WWE doesn't want New Japan working with AEW. That's the whole point of this whole thing. AEW knows this. New Japan knows this. The question is whether or not the deal that WWE was offering New Japan to work together exclusively is going to be lucrative enough for them in the long run. Now, there are some benefits to this, especially, and my main concern is for us as fans. And there are some benefits to us because there are some dream matches that would happen from a WWE New Japan partnership. Cesaro being in the G1 would be amazing. Will Ospreay against Randy Orton and or Seth Rollins, given their Twitter beef histories, would be great. Seth Rollins, who I've always called the White Tanahashi, taking on Hiroshi Tanahashi would be pretty cool. Randy Orton and Kazuchika Okada, who are often compared who are often compared to each other, them having a match at Wrestle Kingdom would be pretty cool. Even on a comedy level, R-Truth and Toru Yano being a tag team would be hilarious and just comedy gold. 2 of the best comedy wrestlers of the last 50 years. And, you have a lot of these little things in there. Minoru Suzuki and Brock Lesnar, Daniel Bryan being able to finally go wrestle in Japan. Of course, Shinsuke Nakamura and Kushida, who were, pillars of New Japan during the mid-2010s, who are now in WWE. They would finally be able to go back to New Japan and wrestle in the New Japan ring and the New Japan event, which would be absolutely huge over there in Japan. So there are benefits to a partnership for between New Japan Pro Wrestling and WWE. However, the downsides are huge. I got into the discussion with somebody today, and this is kind of the benefit I have, and very few of us have, from being wrestling fans before WWE was the end-all and be-all wrestling, before they won the Monday Night War, before even the Monday Night War was a thing, before WCW started losing. I'm old enough to remember, as a wrestling fan, like I said, for 10 years, there were multiple wrestling companies. WWF was slightly the biggest one, and they had their style, and NWA had their style, AWA had their style, World Class had their style, UWF, GWF, USWA, on and on and on and so on and so forth. I remember that time, and I also remember seeing how a lot of deals, and it wasn't just Vince, Crockett did these deals with some other indie promotions as well, kind of started just deteriorating the territory system for other reasons as well. But we've seen this many times with, in particular in this case, WWE, taking something from outside of WWE that was popular, putting it in the WWE world, and ultimately ruining it. And if you don't believe me on that one, we only have to look at a couple of examples. Let's look at the WCW invasion. It started out really hot. Everybody was excited. About a month into it, everybody was like, man, this sucks. The ECW revival, where they had a couple of one-night stand pay-per-views, which were fantastic. And then they had ECW on the Sci-Fi Channel, and in no time that fizzled into nothing. Remember when the NWO was brought into the WWE, and that started out hot, and that fizzled into nothing. And I mean, even in more modern times, Broken Matt Hardy, which was him and Kenny Omega, were the 2 hottest things in the wrestling business that were not in WWE in 2017. Matt Hardy goes to WWE, and the Broken Matt Hardy thing became Woken Matt Hardy and all this other garbage that went along with that, and that went down the toilet. So even in their own company, their own little version of an indie promotion, NXT, they have like a 20% success rate with bringing anybody up from NXT up to the main roster without them being ruined or destroyed or just not working out and not being able to find what was going on there. And there's a reason for that. WWE is sports entertainment. And in this particular case, New Japan Pro Wrestling is pro wrestling. And the two are different things. I know a lot of people don't like to want to admit this or don't want to believe it or whatever it is, but the very simple example, the very simple way for me to explain this is that you have theater, Broadway, and you have motion pictures. Both are acting, but motion pictures are a lot different from stage plays. And people who like stage plays, and people who like movies. There are things that work in a movie that aren't going to work in a stage play. And there are things that work in stage plays that aren't going to work in films. And that's probably the easiest way for me to explain this to people who still don't get this concept that there is a difference between pro wrestling and sports entertainment. So New Japan, and with these two companies, New Japan and WWE could not be more diametrically opposed in their philosophy about pro wrestling / sports entertainment. WWE's approach, as I've been saying a lot recently, is sports entertainment. It's basically Saturday Night Live with a wrestling ring. That's what they do. Improv comedy, which is not even improv, it's scripted. And watch Saturday Night Live and imagine it in a wrestling ring. You got WWE. New Japan Pro Wrestling is this weird mix of an old school wrestling vibe and the old school wrestling format where it's, you know, match, 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 match. And the only promo you might hear in the night will be from whoever wins the main event, and that's to close the show. It's wrestling matches. They wrestle a harder style, a stiffer style, a more dangerous style. WWE style is not as dangerous. It's not as heavy on the physicality and the hard hits. It's more about theatrics. It's more about presentation. It's more about promos. And just there's so much wrong with the idea that after the initial couple of dream matches that we'll get, which will probably be awesome, again, like the NWO when they first came into WWE and the WCW Invasion and ECW coming into WWE, New Japan guys coming into WWE may be cool the first couple times out, but as we've seen with everything, even their own brand splits, even their own NXT guys, after a couple months, it's going to be, the WWE sweaties are going to be like, who are these guys? They can't even cut a promo. They don't even speak English. And the WWE sweaties are not going to want to see this. They don't want New Japan anywhere near WWE, and conversely, the New Japan fans do not want sports entertainment anywhere near New Japan. We've already seen tweets today from KENTA, who made a joke about KENTA versus Hideo Itami. You got El Phantasmo asking him, man, have I been talking to the wrong Khan all this time? I mean, and just thinking about some of the prime guys in New Japan Pro Wrestling, since that's my favorite wrestling promotion, most of the guys in the main event and at the top of that card in New Japan and that roster, either they turned down WWE or they voluntarily left WWE. Juice Robinson voluntarily left WWE. Jeff Cobb voluntarily turned down WWE. Same goes for Kota Ibushi and Zack Sabre Jr., who were both in the Cruiserweight Classic, if you guys remember that. And before it was over with, they were offered contracts and both of them turned it down. Hiroshi Tanahashi, I mean, God, if he had a problem with the way Kenny Omega and the Elite did pro wrestling and said, this is not New Japan Pro Wrestling, what the hell do you think he's going to think about the stuff that WWE does in relation to what he thinks pro wrestling is? Kazuchika Okada's turned down WWE several times. Tetsuya Naito infamously stiffed them on a lunch when they tried to sign him, which is a urban legend, which may or may not be true. Minoru Suzuki famously walked out of WrestleMania early. He watched Shinsuke and AJ's match, wasn't impressed by it, and left the show early because he didn't care to watch the rest of it. That's not and I tried to explain this to a couple people today, and it's like, you're talking about two different cultures, two different perspectives on what they enjoy to watch when it's regards to wrestling. Again, the same way people who like watching actors and acting, people who are theater people are not necessarily going to like movies as much, and people who like movies might not necessarily like theater as much. It's the same thing in this situation. Some actors who are theater actors may not work out on the big screen. Some big screen actors can't work on a live show in a live theater in front of a crowd on Broadway. This happens all the time. This is not a hard concept to get if you understand the world outside of WWE, that there is one. So there's a lot of this craziness going on online today. And the ultimate finals nail in the coffin of this whole thing, which is part of the reason I had to record this, is now it seems that this whole thing is a bunch of blown up for nothing, because before Dynamite came on tonight, Tony Khan, along with Tony Schiavone, put out a video on social media where Tony Khan basically said this.
As the Forbidden Door, I read in the Observer today that New Japan Pro Wrestling apparently has had talks with WWE's president, Nick Khan. Well, Nick, I have to say, if you've been talking to New Japan Pro Wrestling for 2 months, you've gotten a lot done. Just in the last 2 weeks, I've had Yuji Nagata, Ren Narita, and Rocky Romero on AEW. I've reunited Roppongi Vice. I've had the New Japan IWGP US champion Jon Moxley defend the title successfully on our show, retaining it. And I have future plans with New Japan Pro Wrestling for the US title. So you must have really gotten a lot done in the 2 months, Nick. In fact, I think there's only room for one Khan in the wrestling business, Nick. And it's me, it's Tony Khan. It's not some con man from Connecticut. Have a fun show tonight, Nick. See you on Dynamite.
So somebody's lying somewhere, somebody's playing Dave Meltzer, which has happened before. Somebody's in denial. Maybe Tony Khan's in denial. Maybe the WWE Khan has got some backstage stuff he doesn't know about. Who the hell knows? But this is yet another example of a crazy wrestling rumor that has now gone out of control. And the thing about it is that even Meltzer covered himself, because Meltzer just said that there were talks between WWE and New Japan Wrestling that happened about 2 months ago. So I wouldn't take any of this to be all that serious. I mean, it's an interesting idea. It's an idea that me personally, having seen this kind of stuff happen in wrestling in the way too long time that I've been watching this damn genre, I've seen this happen so many times. It never works out for the smaller company, and usually the smaller company winds up getting swallowed or going out of business. I don't want New Japan Pro Wrestling to go out of business. I want them to stay as far away from WWE as possible. Again, WWE's goal is to dominate and monopolize the wrestling world around the world. That is not the goal of Ring of Honor with their exclusive deal. It wasn't the goal of TNA. It wasn't the goal of any of these companies. Those companies partnered up so they could grow the exposure of their business. In the case of WWE, and it was beneficial for both of them. It's beneficial for CMLL, New Japan, and Ring of Honor when they had their partnership. TNA, and same thing with AEW here to get AEW's presence over in the East. When it comes to WWE doing a partnership, WWE doesn't need to do a partnership. They don't need more exposure. They don't need to expose themselves to other people. Yes, WWE is not anywhere near as popular in Japan as it is here in the States, but people know about it there, but they don't really care for it. It's not their style of wrestling. Again, they're more theater people. They're not motion picture people, which WWE always says they're making movies. So that's an appropriate metaphor. But at the end of the day, I think all of this is really silly. And until we ever hear an official announcement or see an official press release from New Japan Pro Wrestling, until the U.S. Championship is off of Jon Moxley, until we don't see New Japan people showing up on AEW Dynamite for a few weeks, I would say I wouldn't put too much stock in this. It kind of sounds like a conversation probably did happen. They've always had conversations between the two companies. But I wouldn't take it as anything to really get bent out of shape about New Japan Pro Wrestling and WWE having any kind of exclusive partnership with each other. But that's my views on it. I want to know what you guys think out there. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. Of course, if you like this video, hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, and definitely share this video on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, Instagram, wherever you talk about pro wrestling, New Japan, WWE, sports entertainment, or how absolutely insane and crazy the wrestling online community is. Until next time, I will see you guys for more news, rumors, and commentary right here on the Rantin Review. Have a good day.